is Mallory Farrell, and this is our presentation on thinking like a scientist.
I'm Lindy Johnston.
I'm Lynn Rice. Reading like a scientist. This is what we found on that. We must study our students like doing a closed reading on each and every one of them individually. Next, we must approach them like scientists. We must give students reading with their questions to answer. That helps them get involved. Tips on being a scientist, tips on bringing a scientist mindset to closely read students while teaching them to become readers is be curious, collect data, identify variables, and expect revisions. Being curious, sometimes the question is more important than the actual answer to the question because it gets their brains engaged in what they're reading. Collecting data. Give students something to look for while reading, a purpose in the reading. Identifying variables. Students are like kaleidoscopes. We view readers through all different senses and lenses. Engagement, comprehension, fluency, print work, and conversation. We need to expect revision. Look closely at each success that our students have. Try and figure out how to get the students to think deeper. There's always more to learn about each of our students.
The next is information on writing like a scientist. I found some information from choiceliteracy.com. It stated that writing like a scientist is vital to link writing to their actual science experiences. Connections help students remember and understand the big ideas of science as they explore the world around them. Several websites said it was very beneficial for students to create a science notebook. These notebooks can contain sketches, models with labels, a list of facts, a collection of questions, graphs and tables, or notes from video clips. Also, information I got on how to write like a scientist come from sciencecareers.sciencemag.org. And they said the first thing about writing like a scientist was avoid using the first person when writing. They said write in a semi-passive voice. For instance, like write done by us, this experiment was. You can also write we instead of I. And they said to have lots of references. Another website with information was sites.google.com. And it was from a first grade class. And she said that some essential skills of writing like a scientist were record their observations and write with lots of details, add more information so the students can learn more. Writing in Science in Action was another website by Betsy Fulweiler. And she said that kids love hands-on science. Kids need to be reading, writing, and thinking about science as well as doing it.
And then the next part, we have information on project-based tasks in science. What project-based tasks are in science? They have a driving question. This question is everything the class does and is focused on. Advantages, they give students a sense of purpose. They begin to realize that there was a purpose to everything that we did in class. There's no more why do we have to learn these questions. Some examples are what's in our water, why do I look the way I do, what makes me stay on a skateboard, are there poisons in our lives. Investigations is the next part. You pursue solutions to authentic problems by asking and refining questions, debating ideas, making predictions, designing plans and experiments, gathering information, collecting and analyzing data, drawing conclusions, and communicating their ideas and findings to others. Artifacts are the products that the students will represent their knowledge and understanding of the driving question. And one person said that they don't believe anything grabs students' attention, focus, energy, or utilize resourcefulness like an investigation they design, develop, and implement on their own. It also puts all students on an even playing field. All students are capable of excelling, and they help build portfolios. Collaboration is when students discuss and try out their ideas and challenge the idea of others. They use telecommunications to allow interaction with a wider student community, outside science experts, and to share information, data, resources, and ideas. And each class acts as their own research team. Technology was the last component of project-based assessment, and it makes the environment more authentic to students because the computer provides access to data and information. It expands interaction and collaboration with others via the network. It promotes lab investigation, and the students are able to use tools the expert used to produce artifacts. And I found some examples of project-based tasks. One of them is a mobile museum. And the driving question is, how can we create a museum that educates children and adults of all ages about our state ecosystems and wildlife? And this is based in a 4th grade classroom. Students had to choose an organism and research it. They then wrote research papers they turned into Google slideshows or other presentation formats to be shown at interactive learning stations on the mobile museum. They created informational posters. They worked with partners to complete Venn diagrams, niche, behavioral adaptations, and physical adaptation graphic organizers that helped them revise their research. They created a 3D model of their organism with clay or felt, and they designed ecosystem murals for their exhibits. The second one that I found is Vehicles in Motion. It's a car challenge. The question is that students are to design and build a vehicle that will go straight, far, fast, and carry a load. Students use the principles of motion, force, relative motion, velocity, acceleration, Newton's laws, friction, gravity, balanced and unbalanced forces, and net force. And they used these and they tested them out, and then they had to improve their designs of 2 cars, one that had and one that didn't have a propulsion system. And lastly, storm stories. The driving question is, students will research the formation of tornadoes, hurricanes, thunderstorms, and lake snow effect. They created research booklets that they called their recipe books, and then they worked together to create an informational newscast where they acted as reporters. And then here's our video on thinking like a scientist.
How does a scientist think? Scientists really use a couple of very key tools to drive their discovery. One is they make observations. Always look around your environment to see what's going on. And then develop questions as to why something happens. For example, if you have a flashlight that doesn't work, your first observation is, I need to provide more light in an area. A scientist would say, what can I use to provide more light in the area where I can't see? A solution would be a flashlight. That's one viable solution. The other solution could be a candle. Well, you get a flashlight, and you're all ready to illuminate the area that you're trying to see, and you turn on the flashlight, but the flashlight does not work. So the question would be, why does my flashlight not work? Well, there are a couple of answers. Either the bulb may be faulty, or the batteries may not be working anymore. Well, a scientist would then test which one of those cases is the possibility. So I would start by replacing the batteries. If you still, wait a minute, you have to replace the batteries the correct way. You have to make sure that the orientation of the batteries is correct for making the light work. If it's still not working, then you can say, wow, maybe the bulb is faulty. And then you would change the bulb. So what scientists do is they make observations and they ask questions. And then they use a series of very simple tests to answer their question in order basically to figure out whether or not the answer that they think is the truth is actually the truth. And so in your everyday world, if you can make observations and then ask very simple questions to explain those observations and then figure out ways to test your explanations, that is thinking just like science.
The next is when we collaborated and did all our research, we did not come up with any questions or anything that didn't make sense to us. Our last research we did was finding graphic organizers.
The graphic organizer that we have right here, it just goes over the scientific method. This could be used in a lower level classroom. You just go through the process, asking a question, making a hypothesis, doing an experiment, and then coming to a conclusion.
These are also examples of graphic organizers that you can use in your classroom for science experiments. Here's a Venn diagram to do the similarities, differences. There's just several neat graphic organizers you can use to help your students understand different concepts of experiments in science.